I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Welcome to today's episode. I'm so happy that you're here. My guest today is Victoria Findlay Wolfe. She is an amazing fiber artist. She makes incredible quilts, loves to play with texture and style and all different kinds of methods of quilting. And she has authored several books about her process and different quilting methods. Her latest book, called The Quilting Experience, a celebration of community and patchwork patterns, is out now. She pulled stories from the community, and the book is broken into 12 life lessons, and each life lesson comes with a type of quilt block and how many of those blocks to make so that at the end you can create your own quilt from the book. So head to her website, vfwquilts.com, or check it out anywhere you can buy books. And I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Victoria. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks for inviting me, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for being here. This is exciting. I was pointed in your direction by Maddie from the Badass Quilt Society. And so I've been following you for a while and just enamored by your work. So this is really exciting.
Thank you. It's great to have a nice conversation with a fellow quilter.
Yeah. Well, you just recently had a book come out, which we will definitely talk about. But before we get there, I would really love to know how you even got into quilting in the first place.
Well, I've been quilting since I was probably about 4 years old. So
Wow.
sewing since I was 4, but learning hand quilting and hand patchwork right off the bat from my mother, and also looking at my grandmother's quilts. My grandmother was the quilter in our family.
Okay.
And my father also had an upholstery business. I grew up on a farm in Minnesota. So pretty much everybody in our family sewed in some capacity.
Yeah.
So it's purely destined to be working in textiles. There was no way around it, really.
No chance not to.
Yeah. So I used to always ask my mother if she would make clothes for my dolls. And she says, well, you can do that. So she was very good about instigating and fulfilling my own curiosity and getting me to figure out how to build something and make something myself. So between my mother's work as a seamstress and my father's as working in upholstery, my three-dimensional skills were very good from a very young age.
Wow, that's incredible.
And then that exploring went on to doing hand projects, like I said, the hand patchwork and hand quilting and making a lot of pillows from a very young age. But I probably started making quilts officially when I was about 13 years old.
Okay.
And so it's been a very long time of quilt making now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. I love talking to people who grew up with it in their home and just being around it, because I think it helps your brain function differently. It helps you see the world differently. And so having those three-dimensional kind of aspect skills from such a young age, I think opens your brain to so much more around you, and it kind of, yeah, like opens up your perception of the world earlier
Definitely.
than a lot of people.
Always very curious. I'm a maker of just about anything. So, as an artsy kid, so whatever I could figure out how to make, if I couldn't get it some other way, then I would just make it. And also growing up on a farm, we're growing our own food, we're canning it. You're constantly making in every aspect of what you're doing on a farm. So that curiosity sort of has been a lifelong thread for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I love that. And so did you carry it through like into your adulthood, and has it always just been there? Did you drop it and pick it back up later on, or?
I pretty much through college and everything, I was always doing mostly garment sewing. I was making some quilts along the way, but there was a time in college when I made some quilts as homework assignments and turned them in. And that became a big conversation in college about whether or not that was craft or art, because I went to art school for a bachelor's degree in painting and fine art. Yeah, and they kind of pulled the whole school together and put these two quilts up as an example. And it was this 500-year-old conversation about whether textiles was a craft or art form. And I was a bit of a rebellious teenager, so it didn't stop me from making quilts, but
Yeah.
I did take a break for a little bit of my life in between there, but always kind of came back around to it. And I think that's one thing that feeds my curiosity the most. You tell me I can't do something, and I'm going to show you how to do it 50 different ways. So that's part of my personality for sure. I don't know if that's a flaw or a good thing, but
yeah.
I enjoy being curious about a lot of different things. So from cooking to how to clean my house to how am I going to paint a picture or renovate my house, like, all of that stuff's really exciting to me.
Yeah. And it's like I think there's a certain satisfaction that comes with knowing that you can do something or that you can figure something out because you've got the curiosity enough to ask the questions of how, and enough skills or enough know-how to kind of figure out how to do it once you get those kind of instructions or get the idea in your head. And I think just working with your hands is so invaluable because it leads to different things. Like I never was interested in learning how to like do home projects like putting in new flooring or resurfacing my cabinets, or not cabinets, but my countertops. But because I started quilting and I started trying to figure things out of how to make them, like it almost sparked that more curiousness in my own self. And so I can imagine growing up that way and having being surrounded by it on a farm, because you do have to do everything for yourself and like make your own or grow and cook and can your own food and make your own clothes and all those things. Like I think it just lends to a lifetime of that, and that stubbornness of like, I'm gonna do it anyway, you can't tell me no, like I will show you how it's done because I can figure it out. Like
Right.
I think
And we're
that's
also lucky because computers help us figure it out even faster than trying to go find a book to figure out how to do it. So
right. Right, I know.
there is
Like
some plus to the internet these
yeah,
days.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, if you
Social media is exhausting, but there are some advantages for sure.
exactly, it's all in how you use it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's awesome. And so I guess like, yeah, that age-old question of whether textile is art or craft. I mean, that argument is just so funny to me because it's like, who gets to decide and why should they get to tell me what I'm saying is art isn't art versus, it's like, I know there has to be like, if you're in art school, there has to be a definition and boundaries for that. But at the same time, like, isn't art meant to push boundaries and meant to raise questions and meant to make people think and ask questions? So like, I mean, I think you nailed, like, this is art.
Art should evoke an emotion, and we can certainly ask any quilter whether or not a quilt that they have made at some point or given a quilt at some point has not evoked any emotion because of. So it's art. That's what I'm sticking with.
I agree. There's nothing like it either. I mean, you can add textiles into other art mediums, but I think quilting as an art medium is just so unique in the way that fabric comes together and the way we sew things together and use different types of textiles to create different textures and depth and the images that we want to convey. And I just stand in awe at art quilters because the way that they reimagine fabric and textile is just incredible to me. And I've not ever made an art quilt specifically
but you
for
have, because quilts are art.
they are. They are. They are. You're right.
Yeah, and that's one more label that it's just,
yeah.
I make quilts. That's what I do. I make an art quilt one day. I might make a modern quilt one day, and I'm certainly going to make a traditional quilt because I love them all and they all float my boat. And on any given day, my feeling might be, or my inspiration is drawn to something that is not put into a box. I can make whatever I want to make on any given day without feeling guilty about it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I bought that fabric. I get to do what I want with it.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, I think that's a pressure too that kind of comes with quilting. Like, well, if I'm not making what everybody else is making with this same fabric, then like, am I really? It's like, just do what makes you happy.
Exactly.
It's your fabric. Nobody else has a say over what you do with it. That's a good reminder for myself too. I get caught up in like, I just want this to be the right project, or like, I want to make sure that this is the thing that people are expecting that to see with this fabric with, but it's
Mm.
almost making the unexpected that makes things a little more intriguing, in my opinion.
Well, we talk about fabric having having conversations with our projects on the wall, and sometimes that conversation is a two-way street. It's not just you saying this is going to be this. So when I'm building a quilt on the wall, I'm having that conversation back and forth with, what does this need to be? What is it turning out? What am I seeing that I didn't expect to see? I don't design things on paper. I design on my design wall with a whole bunch of randomly cut pieces, and it becomes what it needs to come in that moment, whether it's what someone's going to consider a modern quilt or a traditional quilt. It just doesn't matter. It becomes what it needs to become, and the more that I make,
Mhm.
everything just gets a little bit better with every quilt that you make. So
Yeah, honing
trying not
those
to hold
skills. And
back from the limitations, just open up to it and see what happens. Take a risk. Creativity is full of risks, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. So like, what is there any difference for like between what was influencing you, as your art school quilter self and now? Are there still the same influences there, or are you finding that you find different things now inspiring and influencing your quilting?
Well, as far as my quilting, most of what I do is inspired by my grandmother's work. That was sort of the first keynote to, my delve into quilt making. It's looking at her work, it's thinking about, the work she did and the work that I do, and thinking about quilters who came before us. So there's a very heavy traditional aspect to what I do.
Hmm.
But I'm also looking to, put my spin on it, to put my voice on it. So that's why I try not to label, what kind of quilter I am, because I don't know what that's going to be. That voice is different every day. We're not the same quilter that we were today, or that we were 5, 10 years ago,
Hmm.
or 40 years ago. Um, you know, we change constantly. We should be changing. If we're just doing the same thing like a cookie cutter over and over, there's not much room for growth if you're just
Yeah.
doing the same thing. Um, so, you know, I think when I was, like I said, I first started out doing hand patchwork and um, just traditional piecing. I still try to incorporate as many traditional aspects into my quilts as possible, making relations to the things that my grandmother was doing. She worked in double knit polyester. She was an arthritic invalid by the time she was 40, so her hands weren't working so easily, but she could very easily pick up scraps of double knit polyester and put a needle through it because it's very spongy and airy, and it was very easy for her to do that. And she
Mhm.
would stick those pieces down onto like big embroidery X's, to stitch those pieces down onto a sheet where she didn't have to worry about the edges fraying. So she was working with a material that worked for her, right?
Mhm.
And, I try to incorporate hand quilting and embroidery in almost all of my pieces as well. Not all the time, depends on the piece, but, trying to incorporate the things that she was doing and bringing those aspects to what we think of as a modern quilt.
Mhm.
Adding in applique, adding in traditional techniques, making sure piecing is great. Improvisational is great. I'm definitely an improvisational quilter as well. Um, but I like to know how to make things, and like I know how to do them, and I like to know how to do them well. And then once I know how to do those skills, then I can certainly break them and try the craziest things that I can, because I know how to fix them, because I have the skills to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm working every aspect of, what we think of in quilting. And from some of the series that I'm working on now is working on those things that I was doing in college.
Mhm.
In college, I was doing sculpture, photography. We were the first year to have computers in college, so we were doing Illustrator and Photoshop. So, I have a whole series of quilts that's combining traditional aspects, digital aspects, photography, dropping them into Photoshop and manipulating them, getting them the way that I want, still putting them into a traditional, having something that has a traditional bent to it, but ultimately also has a modern bent to it. And with the photography, leans to the art side of what I do. So I can mix all of those elements to tell that story, to say, okay, so is a quilt art? It's always coming back to that and showing that it certainly can be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's incredible. I've seen your posts of the double wedding ring quilt that you're working on, and just the the piecing technique that you're using to bring the like make the melon fabric match the filler fabric on the outsides, and the joining of those pieces, and just how
Very,
clever.
but
Yeah.
this is very traditional. And
Yeah.
usually when I do a gift, I'm asking the person what they kind of want. So that's what they need. So these are like the most traditional ones that I've ever made, I think. But I always try to find something that I can do to change it up from the last one that I made, because it's not so fun to keep doing the same quilt over and over.
Yeah.
I want to try something new and see where
Yeah.
else it can go. So,
Yeah.
well, while keeping the recipient in mind, of course, making sure they're getting a quilt that they're going to love.
Yeah. Yeah,
So.
exactly. Yeah, just think about other mediums of art, like painters and photographers. It's not like they take the same exact, and they might take a million shots of the same thing, but what they produce from that is one of the one great shot. Or
Right.
painter sticks with the one great painting, unless you're Picasso and you paint the same thing 68,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
But um yeah, so and with quilting, it's like if you keep making the same exact thing the same exact way over and over again, it does get really boring, because you're not learning anything new. You might get faster at a certain part of it. You might find ways to kind of cut corners in terms of you know whether you're chain piecing or whatever, just to get things going faster, but ultimately you're still making the same quilt. And so I think
Yeah.
it's I love to see kind of more modern twists, or just a twist on the traditional, to get it to be something different and tell a different story. So it's been kind of cool to see that. And I just the way you're and then you cut, take these pieces and you sew those together and it makes that. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And just, I never would have thought of that.
Anything you cut off, always put it back in your quilt. Find a way to incorporate it for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So with your book, which I am excited, I'm gonna grab a copy for myself. But it's called The Quilting Experience, a celebration of community and patchwork patterns. So where did the inspiration for that come from?
Well, all of my books are about a different aspect of the process of creativity, whether it's playing with scraps and incorporating them into your quilts and looking for color palettes, that kind of a thing, by just working improvisationally, to obviously the double wedding rings, how one idea, one story leads, one memory leads to from one idea to the next, to the next, to the next, or looking at a traditional, what we consider a traditional pattern, and then that someone might find it to be really difficult, and then actually showing you that it's really not, and looking at how you manipulate that pattern and turning it into as many different looks and possibilities. So, all of the books have about a different part of the process. Playing with purpose, I'm talking about making conscious decisions about why you're making those choices, and knowing why you're making those choices when you're building something, and how important the story is. And so then during COVID, I realized, not having my community around me, how that was affecting my creative process.
Mm.
Generally, I'm a homebody. I don't actually like being around a huge amount of people. I find it very anxiety building and uncomfortable. So I'm always a little bit surprised as much that I've done out in public, and sort
Mhm.
of really enjoyed during COVID to being home. But
Mhm.
after a certain amount of time, I was realizing how important that I still needed that connection, particularly with my core group of quilter friends. So I was really thinking about that community, and how does community play a part in our creative process. And so then I was thinking about all of the fabulous stories and experiences that I've had over the past 12 years or so, from being a teacher and traveling all over the world and exhibiting all over the world. And thinking about, again, the quilters who've come before us, because we have these antique quilts that you pick them up and you think, God, these are amazing. What were they thinking when they were stitching this? And realizing that, we're stitching our daily lives, especially during that COVID time, that we stitch our lives into our quilts, our daily life, our traumatic lives, our happy lives, whatever it is, you're stitching that into the fibers of your quilt, and how important those stories are. So I started making notes about stories, and special things that have happened to me over the years. Ultimately, I was thinking about also at retreats, when we get together, what are the things that we talk about?
Mm-hmm.
Even when I'm teaching a class, I usually do 5-day retreats, and I think about how valuable the mealtime is because of the stories that we come up and we share about. Whether if it's a group full of women, I'm learning things about women's health, things that I've either dealt with or I might be dealing with in another 10 years, right? So just the plethora of information that I learn while I'm together with other quilters.
Mm-hmm.
So I put a call out and was asking other people for their stories to see how does quilting connect us. Our lives are very much like like fiber. There's a warp and a weft, and all kind of mesh together in a magical sort of way. And I really wanted to capture all of that. And so this book is broken into 12 life themes, and with each theme there's a specific block and a specific number of blocks to make. So there's a prompt that I'm giving you on that theme to kind of read through, to be thinking about while you're picking fabrics and sewing them together. And so that by the end of the 12 chapters and the 12 blocks and the amount of blocks that you have to make, that you end up with enough blocks to be able to make what I call the experience quilt. That you've been purposely thinking about the things that happen in your life, and how all of that is in your book or in your quilt. I didn't really mention in the book, but I also think then if you tackle this quilt and make the experience quilt, that you make a note with it and keep it with the quilt, because there's just a lot that can happen depending on how much time you've taken to be able to make the quilt, to document the things that were important or not important, or maybe jot down a little something for each of the themes and how it relates to you. And think about what someone else will get out of that when they read that one day. Really cool. So besides that, in the book, those blocks are also shown in different quilt layouts, and also different combinations of putting them together to see how else you can get really beautiful quilts. And I wanted the blocks to be, some of them are simple enough so that you're not struggling so much on the construction. So I wanted it to be achievable for everybody, but yet I'm still incorporating blocks where you still have a skill that you have to learn, because I have to push people. That's just what I do.
Yeah.
If you're not learning something, you have to be able to learn something. You have to have a couple of challenging blocks to, up your skills a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of the goal behind the book. And, I got some really, really amazing stories that people shared. And I always tell people it's a book you're going to want to sit down and have a cup of tea with and read through it. And another day you can be making from it. And the next day you're going to need a box of tissues, because you're going to hit a chapter that is going to pull on your heartstrings, or you're going to read something that you can totally relate to. And you're making those connections, and I think that's really cool. So I'm very proud of the book, and for that reason, and to all the contributors who sent in their fabulous stories.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm excited to get my hands on a copy, because I love a mix, like when you can learn about people and understand like the stories behind their quilts. And that's why I like being part of the judging of quilts at the quilt show, or my local quilt show, because I get to hear the judges' comments, and then I get to see the quilts. And then if I know the person, or get to read their labels after the fact when they're hanging in the show, and just kind of talk to them and understand their quilts and see how they were viewed by, trained judges versus just like spectators and things. There's like that quilt lives a whole life, and just knowing what's going on behind the scenes, I think is so important, and just how incredibly like healing and meditative and
Mm.
frustrating and joyful quilting can be, especially as you're trying new things and trying to figure out how something is supposed to work, or trying to get something to work the way you want it to work. Um and then when it all comes together at the end, you kind of forget about those parts and go, oh my God,
Absolutely.
look what I made.
Yes, and hopefully you forget about the little things where you were challenged, because challenging is a good thing.
Hmm.
Learning something new,
Yep.
so it's all very good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was there any one story in particular that like stood out to you the most, or that you had to like take up more time to process through it as you were adding it into the book?
Oh, there's quite a few that sort of jump out at me. Um, I don't want to give away all the the really good ones.
Yeah, no, don't. What chapters are they in though? So we know, no.
There's a lot to read in there, but there's a couple stories about some of the quilting retreat shenanigans that I've been a part of with a group of quilters. Um, there's a story of a friend of mine who works with some Alzheimer patients, and a couple of her ladies that she cared for had been quilters, and she noticed really quickly that she thought, well, if I give them some fabric, how will they relate to it in front of their sewing machine? And so she would take the needle out of the sewing machine and she would let them push the fabric through, and they would just immediately, that muscle memory would just be there immediately. And that was always one story that just really kind of tore through me.
Hmm.
I just found that really powerful. And in fact, the woman has had a lot more cognitive moments since kind of getting back to, and the fact that she could actually sew again with help, to be able to piece again. And I just always thought that was a really amazing story.
Hmm.
There was another gal that I had been teaching in a class, and she was doing, I think it was a herringbone class or my double wedding ring class. I can't remember which one it was for sure. It's in the book. I should probably reread it. But she had had a stroke a few months before I was there teaching. And she had been a master quilter, and she was really struggling and was crying and upset that she couldn't do it as well as she used to been able to do what she was doing. And so that kind of pulled us together to have this conversation about, that we're all kind of going in the same direction. Our skills that are really good right now don't mean our skills are going to be really great later on. And, trying to keep in our mindset, at least in the back of our minds, that, we have to be gentle with ourselves, whether you're struggling with that seam right now, and then it gets easier later on, it might get difficult again, that we need to have that same grace that we do when we were first learning the skill than it is at another time in our life. So I thought that was another very powerful moment. And I had called her up. This was a few years ago when I had her in class, and then when I was working on the book, I called her up to kind of see, how she was doing now and what kind of work was she doing. And she just randomly said in the conversation, she says, best advice I can give you. She goes, you are never too old to have a new sewing machine. And I thought that was just great. She was 80. She has since passed away fairly recently, but I still hold that moment of real joy with her reminding us that we are never too old to have a new sewing machine. But that was just really lovely.
Yeah, that's some really good advice. And I think it's true, if you are doing what you love, regardless of your level, and if you, God forbid, have a health incident that takes some of your skill away, just because you can't quilt the same way you used to or piece the same way you used to, doesn't mean that you don't deserve nice things.
Well, yeah. And, whatever is good enough today is good enough, period.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing is perfect. We don't have to do something perfectly.
No.
Nobody's ever going to notice if we give a gift and there's points that don't match or whatever, that quilt is always going to give warmth to somebody, and it just doesn't get any better than that. It's a quilted hug. That's what
Mhm.
you get.
Yeah, 100%. I was teaching um the long arm certification class at my local quilt shop for a little while, and teaching these people how to just free motion and follow paper pantographs, and they'd get so mad at themselves. And I was like, well, how long have you been long arming? They're like, this is my first day. I'm like, oh, okay. I just wanted you to say that out loud for yourself, because
Right.
like it's never going to be perfect. You might get really good at it, but like it's never going to be perfect, especially if you're on the backside of the machine and you're following a laser pointer on a paper pantograph. Like it's always going to have your handwriting kind of
Right.
slant to it, which
Exactly.
makes it, in my opinion, makes it more perfect, because now you're imbuing yourself into this quilt. And like also reminding myself of that concept to like drop my perfectionism outside and like
Uh, we all need those kind of reminders.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that it's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay if your seams are a little wobbly, or if, yeah, points don't match. Like you said, if somebody's nitpicking those pieces of your quilt, then maybe they don't deserve the quilt.
Always that.
That being said, with all the teaching you've done, like what has been like your most favorite thing to teach or skill to teach?
I love teaching the double wedding rings for all the people who say they can't do curves because curves aren't that hard. I don't find any of these skills to be particularly difficult. Y seams, love teaching those. Partial seams, I love teaching those, because when people get that aha moment, I find that it takes people about 8 tries.
Mm,
So I literally make them mark it off 1, 2, 3 when they start, like, it's a third one and I'm ripping that thing out. And I'm like, okay, how many was that? They're like 3. I'm like, you got 5 more tries to go. Taking it down into baby steps when you're learning a new skill. In my Modern Quilt Magic book, I was showing all the techniques, and I broke it down into a small project. So if you learn how to do the skill on a small project, instead of going, I'm going to learn that new skill and make a king size quilt,
mm,
why do you do that to yourself? You have enough fabric to get you through 3 lifetimes. You can afford to make a pillow cushion. Learn the skills on a small scale, then jump in and make your big project. You're not going to struggle in the same way. You're going to already have mastered what you needed to learn. Then you can go on and make the bigger project with ease and enjoy. So again, giving yourself that grace that you need to get through a few tries, before you master a skill. So, and when you think about it, trying something 8 times is really not that many. It's really not that many. When you think of how many seams you sew together into one quilt, 8 tries at one little thing is not a big ask.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. When you put it in that perspective of like, it's only 8 tries out of the, 1,000 seams you're going to sew, it's
right.
give yourself that space to learn it. Yeah. Yeah. I've never tried a Y seam. They scare me, but you're convincing me that it's not that hard. So,
They're not hard. And I
yeah.
write patterns with all of the little tips and tricks in there. I always tell people, read my patterns, because the tricks are in there. The order in which you sew things, whether you're flipping something one direction or another, all of those things accumulate to ease of construction. And
Mm,
um, I think taking the time to actually read the instructions that people write.
yeah.
Not look at the pictures, because I'm certainly known to be doing that myself. So yeah, yes. So reading the instructions in any of my books and any of my patterns, looking for those tips and tricks, because I'm always looking for doing something one and done. I've already got the skills, so I want to be able to sew it, be done, and move on to the next thing. So I'm doing it. I'm taking all the guesswork out for you. I'm sewing it. I'm looking at it going, can I sew that in an easier way? Is there another way that I can do this? How does the fabric behave if I flip it over? What is there a previous stitching line? Like, I'm looking for all of these things so
Mhm.
that when I'm making it, that I can just breeze right through it and get it done, because I have a very long list of quilts I got to get made in my lifetime, and I can't be just sitting around on my laurels wondering if this is the fastest way to do something. So I like to move, and I make things very, very quickly.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, and that, that's where that that rebellious nature of like, let me show you different ways to do it can come in handy, right? You
That is
find the,
curiosity right there.
yeah, the
Don't
old
like
traditional way versus what works better. Like, let's make this happen so we can get more quilts made because
That's right. I got to make the next quilt. Once I have my idea, I'll figure it out and then I have to sew it together. I don't find that to be as much fun. I've already designed it on my wall. Now I have to make it. But in my head, I'm already working on the next project. So no, I want to sew it fast and get it done so I can get on to the next thing. Cut the next pile of fabric, get some more dust flying around. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, what's next? I do find myself kind of getting bored in the middle of projects. Once I like know what it's supposed to look like, I'm like, okay, I need like how can I get this done faster? Because I'm tired of looking at this. I want to move on to the next thing. Like I'm excited to have it finished and I'll obviously do a good job, but like, yeah, that need to like try something new and do something different and
Right.
make something different is definitely there for me too. So I can appreciate the sentiment. It's itchy sometimes.
It's itchy finger sewing, exactly.
Yeah. What's your favorite like textile to work with? Do you stick with just quilting cottons or do you like to mix a bunch of
I
different?
make all kinds of fabrics, whatever I have. I've got flannels, I've got wovens. I was sewing leather today, cottons, double knit, antique fabric, embroidered fabric. I've got a little bit of everything. And, depending on the quilt, depending on the project, it all goes in. So
Nice.
I got a big stack of t-shirts here that have to be made into a quilt. Yeah, I have, it's all fair game.
Yeah, I agree. I love trying to use different things. And as a quilter for hire, I end up making a lot of memory and t-shirt and clothing quilts. And I just recently made a quilt with suits. Like she's like, I want, this quilt for my daughter made out of my husband's suits. I'm like, okay. So there's just a mix of all these
Absolutely.
different kinds of fabrics, but it was so fun to figure out how to make them all work together and make a cohesive piece. And thankfully, I grew up around crafting and sewing. My mom's been sewing since the dawn of time um and just being around it. And so being able to also work with her as we were building the business, like to learn how to be able to use and manipulate these different types of fabrics and textiles into a quilt altogether has been really cool. And it's like one of those things where the curiosity of like, how do we make this work? And she's like, well, I don't know. What do you think? And how do you think we should approach this? And giving me kind of some leeway to think about it, but also being there to kind of be guardrail bumpers for me as I've worked
Right.
through some of those quilts and figured it out. But that has also given me so much more confidence. And I think if we don't ever explore outside of what's kind of expected, again, that expectation of what quilting looks like now, if you don't ever kind of get outside of that and try something different or work with new materials, it's like, in my opinion, I'm just going to be very clear. It's my opinion. I think that it kills your growth and kills your curiosity and makes the quilting become just like a rote thing that you're doing for other people instead of for what is feeding you and your curiosity and your learning.
Yeah, and I think again that depends on, in my classes and stuff, I'm always talking about identifying what parts of your process, what do you do over and over again, and which parts are you happy with, and which parts do you want to grow in. Some people are absolutely happy to just be doing rote quilting, and that's perfectly acceptable because they're getting what they need out of by just not having to think about it. That's what people love
Sure.
doing kits and all of that. That's all perfectly acceptable. When I'm speaking about process in general for pushing people outside their comfort zone, it's literally for those who want to push a little bit further outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
But all of that is welcome.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is really great about quilting, is because this little thing with fiber, with threads going in two different directions, can tie people together in so many different ways, no matter what our process is. And it's just a really exciting thing.
Yeah.
And aren't we lucky to have such a cool community that we can get together at our quilt guilds and immediately find like-minded people right off the bat? That's quite a gift.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. And to see just people's ingenuity and what they see as a medium for their art and for their quilting versus what maybe somebody else might grab, it's like
Mhm.
just seeing the vast array of vision and ideas coming together. And especially like I love going to quilt shows, and I mentioned my local quilt show just recently happened, and just seeing the range of quilts that were displayed and judged, and um just so much genius under one roof, so much ingenuity and curiosity under one roof, and it all
Mhm.
has its place in that same room. And um it just was really encouraging also to see some of it. Like,
Absolutely. Very good.
yeah, it's really, it's always inspiring. I always leave quilt shows like, okay, I'm gonna make a million things when I get home, and I'm like,
The quilt
heavy.
show done its job. It's instigated more ideas.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I'm always so impressed by ours. It's the Boise Basin Quilters Guild. It's our show. It's the last weekend in September always, and we get nationally certified judges to come, and it's kind of a big deal. But
Great.
I'm just always so impressed with it, and just impressed with the level of skills that people have. And I just love getting to like zoom in on people's work, and get the zoomed out and get the zoomed in, and that that feeling of like staring into somebody's brain for a minute is really just so fun. And I mean, I wonder if you feel that same way when you're in a class teaching and you're watching people work. Like, is does that fuel your inspiration? Does that fuel your desire to create new things? And
Oh, absolutely. I'm constantly being inspired by my students. They think and that they're there just for, to glean something from me, but I'm certainly learning from them as well. I'm watching how they're cutting their fabrics. I'm watching how they're putting fabrics together. I'm watching things that maybe they won't see, but I see, or things, colors, combinations put together that they might not like, but I'm like, totally into that. Like,
Mhm.
we're learning off of each other constantly. And yeah, no, there's never not a moment where inspiration strikes. It
Mhm.
happens everywhere and anywhere.
Yeah. I think that's a fun thing about community and quilting is like, even though you might not feel like you have anything to offer, if you're new in the quilting space, like you might think that if you're in a class and you're listening to this teacher, like, oh, they're the professional, so like I don't have anything to offer them. But I think that community aspect is there, and it matters for a reason, because we all have something to bring to the table. And whether you know it or not, like
Absolutely.
it's an incredible thing to be a part of. And just that quilting is, it can be very isolating, but it's also can be so very social. And just even the fact that like you maybe saw somebody do something once, and that encourages you to go home in your own private space and try that thing and see how it works for your process. To me, that's like togetherness.
Mhm.
And you don't have to be physically with that person, but you're bringing them with you into your space, into your crafting time. And that's just such a beautiful part of quilting that I have found is really soothing to me, that I get to bring my friends with me all the time, because even
Uh-huh.
if they're not physically with me, I've got little bits of them in my process, and in my design eye and how I approach things. So it's
Yeah. And
really
that
fun.
back to what I said earlier about, we're not the same quilter we were yesterday or last week or 5, 10 years ago, because moments like that change your process in, sometimes small ways, sometimes huge ways.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's all to be acknowledged for sure. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said you mix hand quilting in still, and do you quilt all your own quilts? Do you long arm
No,
them? Do you?
no, I used to have two long arm machines. I don't have those anymore. I My best friend is a long armor, and she quilts most of my quilts for me. small projects and things, I tend to do those, hand quilt those myself. I used to quilt some of my quilts, but I don't do that. I don't have too many other things to do. So we do everything together as a collaboration between Shelley and I.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That relationship is so important. And as a long armor, I can attest to, like, when I know my client, and or if it's a friend and it's like I understand them and what they want, and we collaborate together and to bring their quilt to life, it's just, there's no feeling like it. It's just so incredible to be able to hand it back and go, look what we did.
Well, when you run a business, you have to start picking and choosing your battles. And if somebody else is better at that or enjoys that more, or I used to be on the road 3 weekends out of every single month,
Yeah.
for many days at a time, and running a business and a shop and all of the teaching and all the other stuff that I was doing, that was for me to get everything done that I needed to get done. So I picked those battles, and I'm more than happy to have long conversations with Shelley and I to figure out what we want to do on each project. So that's really nice.
Yeah. That's so lovely that you have her and that you can just give that to her and you can keep making quilts.
Keep making, get on to the next idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's funny, like, because obviously I love making quilts, but I think, yeah, the part of the process that I do love almost more than anything is the long arming part, because I get to put a personality to the quilt. And so I get really excited to get to that part, whether it's mine or whether it's somebody else's. I want to be able to give that quilt its personality. And
Absolutely. I
not
do
that
enjoy hand quilt and sit with something for a really long time and just
Mhm.
slow stitch on something. I enjoy that very much.
Well, I love that you pulled the community together to put this new book together, and that out of these stories of life, you can create a beautiful quilt that it is imbued with those things and those experiences, and almost as a way of journaling your own experiences. And I like your idea of leaving a note with the quilt of, this is what I was thinking when I was making these blocks, and putting
Absolutely.
it with it. And I just had a conversation with Emily Watts about, labeling your quilts and marking your art and making sure that people know that it's you that made it.
Yep.
And I have been terrible at it in the past, but I'm starting to get better at it and labeling
There,
my quilts. And yeah.
that way, pick it up one day and know at least your name of who put the heart into that quilt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so that just gives it a little extra push. But so the book is called The Quilting Experience, a celebration of community and patchwork patterns, and it's out now.
yes.
So
Yep.
is it everywhere
Available
you can buy books?
site. It's Amazon. Yep. It's on my website, vfwquilts.com.
Okay,
Absolutely.
perfect. Well, thank you again for being here today and talking with me about your quilting experience. And I'm sure we'll keep in touch, and I'm excited to see that wedding ring quilt come together.
Got a deadline. They're getting married this month. I got to get rocking here.
Okay, well, I'll knock on wood for you that you get it done in time, and we'll look for your other projects.
Right. Thank you
Thank
so
you.